Hello YouTube, and welcome to my show, Sexism in Movies and TV. For 5 years I've been doing this show, and usually in a new seasonal intro, I give the reasons as to why I do it. Well, I've come up with some new reasons, in addition to the ones that I would give out in the last intro. I do this show to point out all of the horrible misandry, which means hatred of men and boys, that happens on mostly American TV and in American movies. But the really sad part of this whole thing is the fact that we're so desensitized to it that a lot of people can predict when it's coming. And what's even worse is that there are some people who actually find it funny. Okay, a new reason I thought of as to why this show must continue is because the toxic portrayal of men and boys that comes from American film and television is actually the one very big factor as to why men and boys basically have such low self-esteem. And the other half of the reason as to why stuff like this gives young men such low self-esteem is because we live in a world where stuff like this is constantly everywhere, all over the TV screens, all over the internet, all over social media. And if a young man or boy is not in a relationship, assuming he's 13 or older, his peers will instantly start picking on him and calling him gay. Then throw in the fact that there are absolutely no positive male role models on TV or in movies for the most part, and when some actually do appear, these insane feminists will instantly label it toxic masculinity and do whatever they can to make sure that it's ripped off the air and essentially replaced by their own pro-feminist, anti-man, anti-boy propaganda. Another reason why I do this show is to point out the fact that the corporations who make these movies and shows, they want to gain social brownie points, which is why in most Western franchises there are no positive male role models. They seek to gain social brownie points by essentially trading old stereotypes for new ones. They think they're being progressive when they're not. They just exchanged good archetypes for bad archetypes. And they do this to be progressive and get social brownie points. And it usually ends like this. And the third and final reason as to why I do this show is because the portrayal of men and boys, not just in movies and TV, but in all media, has become horrific. To the point where it's downright dehumanizing. And I could see some kid's little sister treating him like bullshit because the characters she watches on TV treat the men and boys around them like bullshit. And it could either lead to this boy becoming abusive towards his sister, or developing really low self-esteem. So anyways, in closing, this show exists to point out the horrible misandry that has infected movies and TV. Now, with that said, on with the review. Okay, this episode of Sexism in Movies and TV is going to be a bad representation segment. Essentially, an episode where, as opposed to reviewing a film or episode of a particular series, I look at the series as a whole and expose the insane level of misandry within it. And as you can easily have guessed by the image on screen, I'm going to be going after Ned's Declassified School Survival Guide. Now, it's my opinion that American television peaked in 2005, and in 2006, American TV started somewhat of a decline that it never really recovered from, and basically just degenerated into dog shit. And you'd probably think that all of this would make this review, or what I'm about to say, about Ned's Declassified School Survival Guide completely redundant, as it aired in 2004. Yes, that is a true statement, and in a weird way, Ned's Declassified School Survival Guide was almost like this sexist prelude to the decline of American TV in 2006 that we just happened to get 2 years prior. If you know anything about this show at all, you probably will come to the realization that it's like another sack of crap that I have kicked around in other episodes of Sexism in Movies and TV. Yep, that's right. Ned's Declassified School Survival Guide was essentially the Saved by the Bell of the 2000 era. Essentially a show that went out of its way to try and teach a message or teach kids about life, have a moral to the story, and do it in such a hypocritical way that the message was completely lost, and you end up hating all of these characters. Ned's Declassified School Survival Guide stars Ned Bigby, his best friend Simon Nelson Cook, or Cookie, and his best friend slash girlfriend Jennifer Moseley, aka Mose, who was shoehorned into the franchise because of network politics. The premise of the show is actually very simple. It will take a concept that may or may not actually happen at any random junior high and basically try to teach both kids and teenagers what to do when they encounter it. And therein lies the problem. This show tries to be educational. To an extent, it causes a c.s.i. effect. Some scenes are serious and try to instill a message, while others are basically zany and over the top and something straight out of Saved by the Bell. In weight, the concept fails with the writing as they clash. Not Saved by the Bell, but Ned's Declassified was essentially a show that was suffering from an identity crisis. Not really sure if it wanted to be the next Saved by the Bell and basically just be a direct sitcom, or whether or not it wanted to be outwardly preachy and say, this is what you do when you encounter a bully, or this is what happens when you try cheating on your math test, or this is what happens when the popular girl turns you down for the school dance. And in turn, the show has aged terribly. And when I say that this show aged terribly, I really do mean it aged terribly. As in, it didn't know whether or not it wanted to be like I said, it didn't know if it wanted to be just a standard sitcom, or whether or not it wanted to be outwardly preachy. I'm constantly comparing this show to Saved by the Bell. The reason for that is that, Saved by the Bell definitely felt the need to be outwardly preachy in a lame attempt to win an Emmy. Where, on the other hand, Ned's Declassified School Survival Guide actually tried to present itself as educational and not just another sitcom. And like I said before, yes, that's an identity crisis. And it's hard to tell which is the greater of two evils. The one that tries to be funny, but at the same time wants to have episodes where there are a message, or the show that tries to be educational and at the same time has jokes in it, because apparently it doesn't want you to take its message too seriously. And now we're going to move on to the characters. And believe me, this is not where the Saved by the Bell comparison ends. We're going to start out with the main character, Ned Bigby, the one who writes the Guide to Surviving Junior High. This boy has a lot in common with Zach Morris. Both are schemers who have a crush on the popular girl and try to use their brains to hatch a plan to put themselves in a relationship with her by essentially taking their alpha male rival out of the equation. Both are weak and can easily be pushed around, especially by the female characters of the show. And, well, both are schemers, but for Ned, it actually makes sense, because he's the one who writes the Guide to Surviving Junior High. And that's the big difference, because with Zach Morris, his scheming is basically just him being an asshole and trying to use his brain to get out of doing things instead of doing them the honest way. I'm just going to say it like this. When you put subliminal messages in your school's PDA system to get out of doing homework and to make the popular girl fall in love with you, you are no longer a good person. And no one should listen to anything you have to say. Simon Nelson Cook, also known as Cookie on the show, is Ned's best friend, and I guess he's like the Screech of the show. You know, the disillusioned nerd who is out of touch with reality. Well, Screech's disillusions was that he could get Lisa to fall in love with him. Cookie's, his disillusionment is the fact that he actually thinks he's cool and doesn't know that he's a nerd. And then there's Jennifer Moseley, or Mose, as she's called on the show. And I'm pretty sure she's intended to be the Jessie of the group, as she's the all-girl, girl power character who is a tomboy and a friend, but by no means a girlfriend until we get to the series finale. Now, I have seen this show, and believe me when I say, she is an asshole. Basically, when they have a scenario that could get them in trouble, she does not want to do any of the work. She just makes Ned and Cookie do it. She is not above pushing Ned around because she is bigger than him, and pushing around a little dweeb like that would be easy anyways. And she is so girl power, it's hard to believe that they wouldn't end the show with the revelation that the biggest joke in all 4 seasons would have been that Mose was actually a lesbian. In all fairness, that actually would make more sense if in the final episode, they basically hint a Ned dating Mose ending, but then pull a bait and switch, and we find out she's actually a lesbian, and Ned remains in a relationship with Susie Crabgrass. Jennifer Moseley is the worst out of the 3 main characters. She's the weakest part of the show, and the show would have been way better without her. And as for the secondary characters, you have Gordy, the school janitor, who is the mentor to the 3 main characters, and the big joke with him is that for all of his solutions, he can't even catch a weasel, which is sexist in its own way. You got Mr. Sweeney, the science teacher, who the show tries to peg as a villain because he goes a bit overboard. The shop teacher, who's obsessed with carpentry. The elderly principal, who retires, and the nicer teacher who takes his place, and the completely over-the-top, power-hungry vice principal who the show also tries to frame as a villain. Okay, now that I've gone through all of the characters on this gynocentric shit show, now I'm going to delve into Wikipedia for episodes, and despite the fact that I won't be able to show any photos, I will tell you stuff that I saw on it personally that is sexist. Okay, episode 9, School Labs. Basically, Ned and Mose both have a class assignment to finish, and Ned gets to the computer first. But since Moseley is larger than him, she basically just grabs him and throws him off the computer, which damages it. You know, that could send some really bad messages to any little girl watching who has a little brother. Basically, what little girls are going to take away from this will have nothing to do with computers. It's basically going to be, if her little brother doesn't want to stop something or give something up, she should just physically assault him and take whatever he had, or just beat him up to stop him from doing that. And like almost every other storyline that comes up on this show, I have to ask you, America, how would you feel if the genders were reversed? How would you feel if some large male character grabbed some wimpy, out-of-shape girl and tossed her across the room just so he could finish his science paper by typing it up on the computer? Episode 22, Substitute Teachers. Basically, this one isn't as bad as the ones I'm going to bring up next, but it's basically about Ned and Cookie tricking their substitute teacher to get away with random things, or at least trying to. The point is that the teacher has a list of who to trust and who not to trust, and Mose makes it onto the not to trust list by the end of the episode, even though throughout the episode she's portrayed as a perfect little angel, while Ned and Cookie are basically seen as basically clones of Zach Morris. Okay, in the episode Asking Someone Out, Mose pretty much expects Ned to ask Seth to go on a date with her, but she absolutely refuses to ask, well, basically to do the same thing and ask if Susie Crabgrass would go out on a date with Ned. I mean, for a character who's actually described as being one of Ned's best friends, she will not do jack or shit for him, which is a problem you're gonna see a lot in this portion of the video. Okay, moving on to Season 3. Okay, Season 3, Episode 9, Revenge. In this episode, Ned becomes a character called the Revenger and helps the average teenagers at his school get revenge on the popular students for several reasons, but they're actually legitimate reasons. The popular teens have actually dicked over the people Ned is helping. And to add insult to injury, this actually takes the form of a comic book. An old 1950s comic book, but a comic book nonetheless. And since this is an American show, this is a completely un-American episode. When this episode came out, I was not in a good place. And I looked up to characters who were vindictive and out for revenge, such as Batman, Azrael, Wolverine, Daredevil, and countless other superheroes. And at the same time, I also looked up to the Z-Fighters, the manga version of Yu-Gi-Oh!, the Straw Hat Pirates, Team Urameshi and Sasuke Uchiha, as well as a whole ton of other shonen protagonists. I can't imagine... Well, if Ned's Declassified made an episode making fun of anime, they'd have a field day, because I know how bitter American TV is towards anime. And you're probably wondering how this is sexist. Well, everyone's out for revenge except for Jennifer Moseley, who once again is portrayed as a saint, and she's apparently the victim of someone wanting revenge on her. Basically, this girl joins the volleyball team that Mose is on in order to sabotage it from within to get revenge. This is an issue that's not black and white, but not only does Ned's Declassified make it a black and white issue, but they also take a stand. Well, they make it clear what their opinion is, when in reality it's nothing like that. My point for this one is that it's sexist to have your two male characters out for revenge and portray them as assholes, and then portray your token girl as a perfect little angel who doesn't want to hurt anyone, except for the times when she does. But those times don't appear in this episode, because they have to essentially keep up the illusion that this character is not a man-hating bitch. In the episode Class Clown, the class clown essentially moves and is relocated to a new school. This episode essentially views the school as an ecosystem, and the class clown as being an important part of that ecosystem. Well, Ned tries to fill his shoes by being a stand-up comedian. Cookie and basically just gets a device to make funny noises. And you guessed it, Jennifer Moseley does absolutely nothing, because she feels that the class clown title is so far beneath her, even though the episode said it's important to have one, and even the school bullies try to fill the role by being the next Three Stooges. Okay, and now I'm going to talk about the shitty two-part finale that sees them move up to high school. In the episode Permission Slips, Field Trips, Signs, and Weasels, the school takes a field trip to a museum where Cookie basically tries to put himself in a relationship with his crush by becoming a superhero called the Steel Eagle. So then, at the end of the episode, or the beginning of part 2, I don't really care at this point, Ned comes to the realization that he has a crush on Mose. And he goes over facts with Cookie that are obviously wrong, where he says she's a great friend, and she's nice and considerate, even though she's not. So, it turns out that Jennifer Moseley has a crush on the quote-unquote wild boy. I mean, that's obviously a myth, so that the museum has a human being, aka feral child, aka Tarzan knockoff, held in the museum. So Ned dresses up like the wild boy, impersonates him, blah blah blah, shitty ending, and then we see Ned and Mose are a couple, and Cookie is now dating his crush. End of series. Okay, and now that I have gone through all the episodes and basically put the misandry within them on display, which is why this show has aged terribly, I would really like to delve into the hypocrisy of this show. And the bulk of it revolves around one character in particular, Jennifer Moseley. I mean, this show hadn't even gotten through its first season, and Moseley was already acting like the bully she was. In the episode Computer Labs, Ned got to the computer first, and those things follow a first-come, first-served basis. And since they both had an assignment to complete, and Moseley could never handle getting a bad grade, or a teacher scolding her because she failed to turn in a assignment, she basically just grabs Ned because he is smaller than her and physically weaker than her, and she throws him across the room, accidentally damaging the computer in the process. And she is never punished for this in-universe. They're both banned from the computer lab because of this. If anything, it should have been just Moseley who was banned from that. And the episode should have ended with her getting scolded because she failed to turn in an assignment. In the episode Asking Someone Out, she expects Ned to do her dirty work, no questions asked, but when he asks the same of her, she instantly refuses. I mean, in the two-part series finale, when she finds out that Cookie is the Steel Eagle, she refers to him as the freak in the bird suit. Now, let me guarantee you, if the shoe was on the other foot, and it was something like Jennifer Moseley as this, say, Catwoman or Wonder Woman type vigilante, I guarantee you that if Cookie found out and called her the freak in the cat suit, she would not only punch him, but the episode would view her actions as 100% justified. And then there was the second part of that train wreck. You see, the wild boy is Jennifer Moseley's ideal boyfriend. And here's why. You see, it would make sense if this character was supposed to be like Tarzan, ripped and buff. But no, Jennifer Moseley's ideal boyfriend is someone who was raised in the wild, therefore he could never be smarter than her, which is kind of weird. You'd think she'd be threatened by Ned's IQ, because he created the school survival guide, but no, her ego gets in the way of that. And two, her ideal boyfriend has to be physically weaker than her, so she can bully him around whenever she's not getting her way, until he eventually gives up and gives in to whatever she wants after she's done beating him up. I mean, it's kind of a good thing in this instance that Ned Bigby was the Zach Morris of the 2000s, as I could never see a sequel to Ned's Declassified School Survival Guide. I mean, I could just picture it. I mean, I can picture it, but I could never see it actually airing. I could see it as a Robot Chicken sketch, where we see them at a reunion and find out that Ned and Mose were married for a year, but then she dumped him because she wasn't interested in him anymore. Well, basically interested at one point, then he played second fiddle to her career, then they fought non-stop, she kicked his ass, then divorced him. Okay, with that said, the biggest and most abrasive piece of the hypocrisy surrounding this bitch is the fact that the show goes out of its way to portray her as this perfect little angel who never did anything wrong, and that everyone around her is the one who has the problem, male or female. Because in season 1, when Jennifer Moseley and Susie Crabgrass were arch enemies, Moseley was going through this arc where she was struggling to make some friends who were girls. She hangs out with 2 boys, and she's so pro-girl, you could have easily expected this show to end with her coming out as a lesbian. So that was going to be really hard. I mean, she's not hypocritical. Well, it is kind of hypocritical. She says she wants friends who are girls, but she has nothing in common with them. She's essentially a egotistic brat who needs to be seen as picture perfect in every scenario. I mean, she has the morals of Jessie from Saved by the Bell, and the superiority complex of Lisa Simpson. Yes, and I do know that eventually Susie Crabgrass was kicked off her throne as the most popular girl in school, and does become friends with this bitch afterwards. But, in all fairness, even in the first season, she was acting like a hypocrite. But, and in the final episode, it was Jennifer Moseley's last chance to be a hypocrite. i.e. the writer's last chance to show off some hypocrisy. So when Ned talks to his best friend about his feelings about Mose, they go over some facts, like her being nice. In the computer lab episode, she actually basically hurled him off the computer, breaking it, which was the catalyst of that episode, because she couldn't stand the thought of actually handing in a report that wasn't finished just because Ned Bigby got to the computer first. Those kind of things are first come, first served basis. And in other words, her behavior in that scene was not nice. I think another one was considerate. Like in the episode Class Clown, where she expects Ned and Cookie to take all the risks, but she won't risk her good reputation with teachers simply because of the fact that they're the ones who grade her homework and other assignments, and overall everything she does there, which is by no means considerate. And he actually had the gall to say that Mose was a great friend. She's a terrible friend. I mean, when Ned was in a relationship with Susie Crabgrass, she basically didn't want him to meet her parents because it would mean he wouldn't hang out with her for one night. Yeah, they had plans, but if she was a good friend, she would understand that. And back on the calling her nice point, in the episode New Teachers, yes, I completely forgot about this one, she actually told their new teacher that she hated him for no reason whatsoever. This man did nothing to piss her off. She had no reason to hate him, but she did for no reason. And basically, after Cookie becomes the Steel Eagle, Mose refers to him as the freak in the bird suit, while she's fantasizing about dating an urban myth. Something that could never happen, as there's no way it would be legal. In episodes like Revenge, Substitute Teacher, and Class Clown, which, yes, all share the same problem with this character, Mose will basically do whatever she can to either not go along with Ned's plan or distance herself as far away from him as humanly possible. Because the last thing that she would ever want is for the teachers who grade her to essentially think that she's like Ned Bigby or Simon Nelson Cook. In other words, this is the type of character who doesn't want to take any risks, but she wants to reap every benefit of the rewards. It's no pain, no gain. And she wants to gain everything without feeling an inch of pain. One thing that Jennifer Moseley and Sam Manson from Danny Phantom have in common is that they were shoehorned in by network politics. They did not need to be a character in this show, but network politics put them in. Oh, and then there's the fact that they're both massive hypocrites. Now, there have been parts in this review where I compare Ned's Declassified to Saved by the Bell. And there's a reason for that. And that reason might be the biggest reason as to why Ned's Declassified has essentially aged as poorly as it has. And that fact is simply that it tries to be educational. I mean, that was the hook of the show in 2003 when Nickelodeon was shown the pilot. And in all fairness, if you're gonna try and be educational, and if they're trying to be educational, in all fairness, it would probably be a bad thing to include running jokes. You know, the pants pull and the mentor character being too stupid to catch one weasel. And it might also be a bad thing to have characters who act just as douchey, if not worse, than the characters on 16. That alone has kind of, in a weird way, made Ned's Declassified the spiritual successor to Saved by the Bell. A show that tried to be funny, but at the same time also tried to be educational. And we all know how terribly that show has aged. And the worst thing about a show like this, that from all points of view resembles a standard sitcom, because it's having an identity crisis and doesn't know whether or not it wants to be funny or serious, is the fact that it instantly infects kids with the c.s.i. effect. The c.s.i. effect, if you don't know what it means, is a term where people take what they see on TV and apply it to the real world, regardless of circumstances. And when shows like this tell kids that this is what high school is like, believe me when I say they will believe it. I mean, in all fairness, this is the kind of show that would create simps. The Ned-Mose relationship would not work out in real life. Ned's Declassified is the kind of sitcom that promotes toxic relationships. Ned's Declassified is a sexist show and is by no means an accurate facsimile of the real world. And the fact that this, of all shows, tries to be educational is sickening. I can only imagine there being both millennials and members of Generation Z who could have seen this and actually followed the advice Ned Bigby gave them, because they couldn't tell the difference, and paid the price for doing so, and may still be paying that price for whatever they did because they listened to Ned Bigby. Now, I'm going to end this review by saying that I've been comparing Ned's Declassified to Saved by the Bell a lot through this review, and there's a reason for that. Despite what you might know, yes, this came out in the 90s, but it actually started in the 80s under the title Good Morning, Miss Bliss. And then eventually in the 90s they changed the name to Saved by the Bell, threw in a few retcons, and it was officially Saved by the Bell, but that's beside the point. Saved by the Bell actually started in the 80s. Ned's Declassified School Survival Guide came out in the 2000s, and I can only assume that in this decade we'll get a show that will basically be the spiritual successor to Ned's Declassified, just as that show may have been the spiritual successor to Saved by the Bell. And if that's the case, I can only assume that it will be more hypocritical than both shows put together. It might actually tell young boys out there to basically tell them that it's okay to be in an abusive relationship. It's okay if your girlfriend beats you up and humiliates you. It's okay to get bullied by your sister, even if she's younger than you. In all fairness, a spiritual successor to Saved by the Bell and Ned's Declassified could easily, without a doubt, be more anti-male than those two shows and The Loud House put together. So there is no real question as to why I'm always telling my family that anime is great and American television is bullshit.